Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar about Jackie Magazine, Cultural Archive of Teenage Life in the UK. My name is Paula Del Val, and I'm going to be today's chair. A quick trigger warning, there will be brief mentions of sexual assault in today's talk. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, David Powell. David has served as archive manager at DC Thomson's since 2014, where he oversees the company's documentary and physical heritage. His role involves collaborating across departments to leverage these collections as valuable business assets, and David qualified as an archivist in 2001, earning a master's degree in archive and record management from the University of Liverpool. His career has been rooted in Scotland, primarily within the public sector and with a particular focus on business records. So he's held archival roles at the University of Glasgow, Glasgow School of Art, as well as local government. And in addition to this professional practice, David has contributed to archival education as a tutor on the distance learning archive management program at the University of Dundee. So without further ado, David, I pass it along to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen and get this working. Okay, so thanks for that introduction, Paula. As you said, I'm the archivist for the archive manager for DC Thomson, the Dundee-based publishing and media firm, where I'm responsible for the documentary and published history of the company, including its comic, newspaper, and magazine back catalogues, artwork collections, business records, photography, and object collections. My role is to make these resources available to the business to support operational commercial processes, but also to facilitate access to internal and external researchers. One of the ways in which we do the latter is to partner with organisations like the Social History Archive to license content for use on their platforms, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about our latest collaboration. DC Thomson & Co. Limited was founded in 1905, but our earliest title, The Scots Magazine, dates back to 1739 and is also available on the Social History Archive. Since that date, we've published around 200 different individual titles, ranging from giants like Beano, The Dandy, Commando, and The People's Friend, through to shorter-lived titles such as Skipper and Red Arrow, which may be less familiar to you. We're a staple of consumer magazines and comics in most people's childhoods and adulthoods. On this slide, you can see the current portfolio of the business, which includes newspapers, magazines, radio stations, B2B energy companies, and genealogy. You may notice that Find My Past, the owners of the Social History Archive, form part of the DC Thomson brand portfolio. But I'm here today to speak as a custodian of a corporate archive collection who's licensed part of our collection on a commercial basis. So today I'm going to talk to you about Jackie, which was released onto the Social History Archive in October of this year. The entire run of the weekly magazine from 1964 to 1993 has been digitized and released, representing over 1,500 issues and 51,500 pages of fully searchable content. I'll explain something of the content and then explore some of the magazine's research potential. I should also state I'm very conscious I'm a male talking about a teenage girls magazine, but I'm here as the custodian of the collection. With a working knowledge of how it's been used. So please forgive any blunders in my language or tone. They really are unintentional. So let me take you back to 1963. In America, JFK was assassinated and Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. Meanwhile, in the UK, the Profumo affair rocked the British government, ultimately seeing the end of a period of Conservative Party rule. Social change was very much definitely in the air. Culturally, Doctor Who launched on the BBC, while at the cinema, the first James Bond film was released. Elvis Presley and Cliff Richard were doing well in the pop charts, but more importantly, October 1963 saw Beatlemania take hold, as John, Ringo, George and Paul started to dominate the charts. As the Swinging Sixties started to take hold, teenage girls were looking for their own voice and means of self-expression, rebelling against the post-war austerity and social expectations of the 1950s, which rock and roll had already started to dissolve. In the UK, young females were devouring comics from the DC Thomson stable. Twinkle was a read with mother-style nursery title. From there, readers would graduate onto Bunty and its famous characters such as the Four Marys. As they got older, they could diversify into more mature comic titles depending on their individual taste. These tackled more sophisticated comic stories about female adventure and empowerment, friendships, and self-improvement, and dabbled in genres such as fantasy, science fiction, and the supernatural. However, where did you go next once you'd started to outgrow this kind of material? Well, into that void stepped a young lady, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Jackie! The great new Go-Ahead magazine for Go-Ahead teens. Jackie brings you the best. Big color pinups, exciting picture love stories, latest news about the top pop stars, plus this lovely twin heart ring, free. Get Jackie, the new Go-Ahead magazine for Go-Ahead teens. From all newsagents, price sixpence.
This advert from 1964 for the magazine launch tells you pretty much all you need to know about the title and what it wanted to be. This is one of about 8 Jackie TV adverts that will shortly be shared on the Social History Archive landing page for Jackie to help add context to the data set. In total, actually, this was one of about 108 films that we found one day in the basement of a building owned by DC Thompson, long forgotten, and we didn't know what they were, and they've now all been digitized, and they've proved to be a great asset. So anyway, let's take a tour around the first issue of Jackie to get an understanding of what the magazine was about. The magazine was printed using the gravure process. This allowed for greater use of colour and photography throughout the magazine and provided a glossy finish which felt more grown up than the traditional letterpress or comic formats. The vibrant red would really have popped out at you at the newsagents. An image of Cliff Richard told you that this was a current magazine. The free gift trailed in the TV advert was there to further entice sales, and the front page spelled out exactly what to expect from the magazine: pop pin-ups, perfume tips, love stories, and photo features. Jackie was a hybrid, part comic and part magazine. Like so many of DC Thompson's titles, fiction stories played a key part, and Jackie was no exception. Short fiction prose stories sat beside comic strip story formats. For example, the fifth proposal, which featured in the first issue, is the story of Julie, the air hostess, who received 5 marriage proposals in 1 week, albeit 3 of them which came from the same gentleman. Julie's job would have appeared glamorous to the 1964 readership, and mixed with romance elements, this style of story was attractive to the aspirational teen reader. The story concludes with her choosing Greg, as she realizes he is the only man who wants her for being herself, rather than as a trophy girlfriend or an aid to a business deal. DC Thompson's fiction has always been of a self-improving and just nature. Wrongs will be righted, bullies will not be allowed to win, the downtrodden will win morally, if not financially, and morality is valued more than material goods and possessions. Julie, therefore, was always likely to therefore take the right decision, influencing the readership to a moral code based around self-worth, albeit dressed up in an aspirational escapist story. By the 1980s, these stories developed into the more sophisticated photo stories for which the magazine is fondly remembered. These arguably made the stories feel more current and relevant. People could see themselves in the stories more easily than in the stylized comic artwork. The themes were usually the same, around friendships, relationships, love, and unrequited love, and all seemed to end in a positive, self-affirming manner for the protagonists. Feature articles were a constant element of the magazine, be they focusing on pop stars, health and beauty, well-being, fashion, or potential employment options. These helped to give the magazine a more grown-up feel, and issue 1 carried this article on perfume, explaining to readers how to select and then wear their fragrance of choice. An important part of the magazine was its pop gossip features, where you could get to know all the latest news about your heroes. The eagle-eyed will notice the Rolf Theroux in the corner of this particular page, and this comes as a warning. Jackie was a topical magazine, and some of the stars and celebrities who were fashionable during its lifetime have now fallen out of favor, and their misdemeanors have rightly caught up with them. So like all research, trigger warnings are probably necessary. A regular early feature was exploring the latest hairstyles and how you could achieve these at home. In the blurb here, you might be able to see the phrase, specifically created for you. The magazine from the outset spoke to its readers, invited them in as a friend and confidant. Pop and film pinups had readers coming back for more each week. Here, the actor Richard Chamberlain is in search of a wife, although I somehow doubt that he was using Jackie as a Lonely Hearts column. The Beatles featured heavily at this point, and by issue 6, each member had featured as either a solo pin-up or as a cover star. Finally, the Cathy and Clare page was the must-read of the magazine for young women who would submit their problems for sage and often brutally frank advice. By their own admission, the problems in the first few issues were made up as they waited on readers to submit their own problems. And I'll explore this aspect of the magazine in more detail later on. DC Thomson had had titles aimed at the female teenage market before, notably Romeo, which ran from 1957 to 1974 and ultimately merged into Jackie, and Cherie, that ran from 1960 to 1963. These looked more like traditional, albeit slightly more sophisticated comics, and their content was somewhat moralistic, escapist romance stories, and not really rooted in the present. They still to me, felt very firmly of the 1950s mold. Jackie's only real competitors in the market at this time were IPC's Valentine and Boyfriend, but Jackie quickly left those standing. Jackie from the get-go was very much in the now. This sample of front covers from across its history evidenced this. Hines, who appeared in issue 2 and I've never heard of before, through to Robert Vaughan from The Man from Uncle, through to Wham, Pete Burns, Sunita and Bros, mark the changing faces of popular culture. Interspersed are positive images of young people whom the readers could admire, relate to, or aspire to be. I want to now explore several facets of the magazine in a bit more detail to give you a flavour of the research potential and to demonstrate why Jackie was successful in reaching its audiences. Pin-ups were a constant throughout the magazine's history. Issue 1 carried Billy Fury and John Lennon, and the 70s saw the Rolling Stones, Mark Bolan and ABBA appear alongside David Cassidy, David Soul and the Bay City Rollers. It's no surprise that Jackie's best ever selling issue in the 1970s featured a poster of David Cassidy to coincide with his tour of the UK at the time. The music of the 80s was marked by acts such as Jean-Michel Jarre, Nick Hayward, Wham, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, and female acts like Toyah, who we saw on a previous slide. The late 80s and 90s saw stars like Tiffany and Seal appearing as double-page centre spreads that could be pulled out and attached to your bedroom wall. By 1993, as the magazine was coming to its close, Take That were in their ascendancy. The magazine never got to see Britpop or the rise of girl groups like the Spice Girls, but which was left to its successor magazine, Shout, which was launched the week after Jackie folded. Jackie offered a place to get to know your current, and I emphasize current, pop heroes. Prior to tabloid newspapers, gossip magazines, the internet, the rolling news cycle, and social media, celebrities could seem distant and secretive and almost elusive, but Jackie was your doorway into their lives. Here, Sonny and Cher talk in this 1965 article about their loves and hates, many of which are easily relatable to most teenagers, such as watching people's eyes pop as when they see our clothes, or hating people who speak down to teenagers. Going full pelt on a speedboat would maybe be a more aspirational or exotic pastime for most of the readership. I suspect if this article had been written 10 years later, the thing they probably most hated was each other. Moving on, there were more in-depth articles revealing more details about the struggles faced by celebrities. This 1975 interview with Leo Sayer explores his shyness and how singing helped him to overcome this. I'm sure that shyness was a topic that most of the readers of Jackie could easily relate to. And for those who wanted to take their obsessions further, the magazine published weekly lists of fan clubs that you could join to stay close to your idols. Bringing this into the 80s, the letters pages were filled with readers declaring their love for celebrities, including George Michael. And these were written in their own voices, including spelling and grammar, as you can see on the article on the bottom left. This was a time when it was easier for celebrities to hide their true selves. This 1985 message from Jade in Derby on the right-hand side desperately wanted to know less about Andrew Ridgeley's girlfriends and much more about George's, being a good example. Although George was dating Pat Fernandez, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So from a research perspective, Jackie is a barometer of popular culture for the period, with celebrities coming and going as they fell in and out of fashion. The carefully written interviews and PR-presented celebrities can be compared with the wider source material now available in newspapers and elsewhere on what was really happening behind the scenes in their lives compared to what was presented in the magazines. Personal appearance and following trends is nothing new, and Jackie was the go-to place for advice, tutorials, and understanding on how to be the thoroughly modern teen. Regular features gave tutorials on how to apply makeup and achieve different styles. These are just a couple from the 80s and 90s, taking readers through how to apply makeup step by step in the days prior to YouTube tutorials and social media influencers. Representation of diversity in the magazine's readership wasn't as strong as you might see in today's magazines. Although girls of different ethnicity did appear in the comic stories and fashion shoots, and BAME celebrities featured. Sadly, sometimes features can seem slightly tokenistic, such as this article on the left giving advice on makeup for people with black skin tones, before trailing a feature the following week called Now Look at New Looks for a Lovely Black Girl. On the right, a letter to the beauty editor seeks advice on suitable foundation for a girl of Indian heritage. What this demonstrates to me is that Jackie was seen as a safe space to ask questions and to learn when you didn't necessarily have anyone else to ask for advice. For many readers, they couldn't ask their own mothers for advice as they'd likely react negatively. Jackie acted as the big sister who showed you how and gave you the confidence to experiment. Notable brands and designers featured in the magazine, and I found this article on Mary Quant's High Street Designs from 1964. I quote from the top of the second page, which you maybe can't read. Every miss who wants to be a hit with the misters tried to catch a guy's eye. What better way than with clothes by Mary Quant? They're fantastic and really good value. Given what a Mary Quant dress from this period can now fetch, I hope that those who invested held on to them. For me, when I think of Jackie fashion spreads, the stylized art of Jill Shipley and her contemporaries stands out as being quintessentially Jackie. This bold style featured heavily in the magazine for over a decade to accompany fashion features. And Jill also contributed to picture stories and other artwork. From an editorial point of view, illustration was cheaper to produce than employing models and photographers and renting out studio space, although makeovers and shoots still featured in the magazine, with readers and even DC Thompson staff featuring within them. DC Thompson staff actually regularly featured in the photo stories if they were looking for somebody for models. But not everyone was a huge fan of the constantly changing fashion. This Bay City Rollers fan in August 1974 sets forth her argument that fashion industry is brainwashing people into purchasing clothes that are worn once and are never seen again. Concerns about fast fashion and sustainability are obviously nothing new. The irony here being that Jackie actively promoted the latest fashions and was therefore somewhat complicitly in the industry. I'm certain if you compare responses to letters sent in by readers to the fashion and beauty editors and the problem pages, and then compare it to the contemporary features and advertising in the magazine, that you'll find many contradictions. And I'm sure it's a research topic that's waiting to be explored. Well-being and self-improvement. One of Jackie's great strengths was how it spoke to its readership. It used their language and took a tone of encouragement and positivity rather than lecturing. This can clearly be seen in articles published under what we would probably now put under the banner of well-being. And it wasn't all about deep breathing and taking hot baths, as this clipping suggests. This article, It's the Jackie Morale Booster, isn't so much about lifting a mood as suggestions on how to be more confident in social situations with 20 hints. The advice ranges from make it a rule never to spend more than 2 nights in a row at home, through to not copying your friend's style, but rather to experiment with your own. My particular favourite is number 4. Say the first thing that comes into your head rather than regret having not said it later. I suspect that was one that would have got me into trouble. As we'll see shortly, parents are a perennial problem for the teenager and the source of much stress, anxiety, and argument. This feature from 1989 focuses on common issues that are seen between readers and their guardians and offers practical advice. Here we can see Jackie being a mediator, seeing both sides of the story and trying to explain both sides to each member of the argument. Some issues that affect teenagers never change, regardless of their age or decade in which they were born. For example, Spots are the curse of adolescence. And over Jackie's run, there is article after article on the topic of spots and acne and how to deal with it. This kind of repetitive feature can be seen in other areas also, dealing with parents or applying makeup, for example, and it offers an opportunities for comparative studies over the magazine's 30-year history as to how social attitudes and solutions may have changed. I've alluded already to Jackie's tone being warm, inviting, and that of a friend and confident rather than a parent. As such, Jackie readers turn to the magazine for advice and support in all sorts of areas, such as fashion and beauty advice, as we've already seen. However, the constant throughout the magazine's history, or one of the best-loved features, was the problem page. Cathy and Clare were the agony aunt personas adopted by the magazine for its first 25 years, before swapping to a more modern voice of Dear Ellie in 1987. Their advice was thoughtful, forthright, and sometimes brutal. This made for both entertaining reading, yet helpful reading, as it allowed the serious to sit alongside the more mundane. This threat of frank advice obviously didn't put off those with issues, and over 400 letters were being received weekly in the office. All got a reply, even if they didn't make it into the magazine itself. Most unpublished responses usually took the form of a pre-written fact sheet, as so many of the problems were on the same basic topics. Sadly, these fact sheets haven't survived within the editorial archive of Jackie. I want to take a brief tour around this area of the magazine, as I honestly feel there's a PhD or a book to be written here. So here we see a regular kind of problem around crushes. Our correspondent is madly in love with Alan Williams from the band The Rubettes. She opines, "I know you'll say it's a crush, but honestly, it's real love." Cathy and Clare's response is plain and to the point. It's not real love, it's infatuation or physical attraction. This is really a passing phase. Try to like him as a musician, someone you can respect and admire, but not fall in love with. As mentioned, conflict with parents is a regular subject. Here, Dad won't allow a phone in the house, but all of her friends chat on the phone each evening, and she's feeling left out and at risk of losing her friends as a result. Cathy and Clare's advice: go and visit your friends, and if Dad complains about you being out all the time, explain that if you had a phone, you'd be home more. And this is where the trigger warning comes in. The sense of safety and community offered by Jackie also meant that more serious problems could be sent in for publication. In this next tragic letter from the 1980s, a girl explains how she and her friend were the victims of an attempted sexual assault. The letter writer is withdrawn and struggling, yet her friend seems to have shrugged it off, and this is causing resentment and tension. This is obviously a very serious situation, and Cathy and Clare direct her to various professional services where she can get the support that she needs. This is no time for flippancy. It's worth remembering with all of these problems that the advice wasn't just aimed at the letter writer, but readers who were experiencing similar issues. As a final example from 1980, Caroline is close friends with Karen, and this has caused gossip at school. I've only given part of the extract here. What felt like a natural friendship has been tainted, and she can't talk to Karen about it because deep down inside, I'm scared I'm a lesbian. What struck me about this problem was that the answer didn't come from an agony aunt, but came from a psychiatrist. The advice is arguably reasonable, but it's terribly impersonal, which is not usual for Jackie in the voice and tone that it normally conveys. It's worth noting that correspondence about lesbianism surfaces throughout the magazine in the 80s and 90s. Given government policy and Clause 28, which didn't apply to magazine publishing, this was probably one of the few places that people with concern could actually turn to, as you couldn't turn to your teachers at school. The subject of boyfriends is by far one of the most common problems. How to get one, how to keep one, how to understand his behavior, jealousy, and all the emotions that come with these kind of relationships. I would not recommend the advice given in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. One of the best ways to attract a boy's attention is to lounge on the beach in a bikini. Another way is to go for a swim and pretend you're drowning. Certainly not the best course of action. I took a random issue of Jackie from 1964 and then roughly one for every 10 years after it and compared the types of problems that were being printed. This is obviously in no way a scientific analysis, but what we can see is an expansion of the number of problems being published each week due to the popularity of the column and some definite recurring themes. Within these, the problems around girlfriends, around girlfriends was actually written in by a boy looking for advice on how to get a girlfriend after the girl he fancied rejected his advances. Self-confidence focused on issues such as sweating and issues around both being overweight and underweight. Male health came from a girl who was worried about her boyfriend who had had an epileptic seizure in front of her, and she didn't know what to do or anything about the illness and was looking for advice. As a final example, I did a search for the following search terms on the Social History Archive just to get a sense of the number of hits that they returned. These may or may not relate to areas of potential research. Again, this is not in any way scientific, and some of these words can be used in different contexts in different places, but it certainly left me wanting to investigate some of these subjects further, but that's for another day. So why was Jackie important? Jackie was the voice of 3 decades of teenagers, ranging from the late baby boomers through Generation X to early millennials. The magazine was agile and moved with the times, following the latest fashions, celebrities, and trends. But what was at its core was its relationship with its readers. Jackie always stayed grounded, putting its readers front and center with their letters, problems, interests, and lives key to the magazine's success. More importantly, the tone of the magazine was not condescending. It spoke to his readers directly in the manner of a big sister or a good friend, rather than a parent laying down the law. At its height in the 1970s, Jackie was selling over 1 million copies a week. It is estimated there was about 2.5 million 13 to 17-year-old girls in the UK in 1971, according to census data. So around a third of young women were reading the magazine, and probably more as it would have been shared around friendship groups and the playground. With such market penetration, it's a reliable source and a barometer for the concerns and interests of young women during this period. Feedback from former readers of the magazine during brand research into Jackie undertaken in the late 2010s stated with confidence that no magazine before or since had made its readers feel so excited or understood in the way that Jackie had managed. It was a core element of their adolescence, and it was remembered fondly. To give you some idea of its popularity within the nostalgia market, the Friends of Jackie Facebook group currently has over 44,000 members. The Beano Facebook group has 37,000. Interestingly, though, the fan site is largely focused on contributors' memories of being a teenager rather than being flooded with scanned pages from the magazine. However, the glue that holds them all together is Jackie. A recent Jackie special published in 2014 had to be reprinted 3 times due to its popularity, and a second special has just been published in October. Both are still available in the DC Thompson shop website for anyone looking for Christmas presents. That's my only commercial pitch. I'm sure as I've spoken to you today, your synapses have been intrigued with the wide research potential of the magazine. There is probably no better cultural resource for the 60s to the 90s in understanding the wants, desires, worries, and joys of being a teenager. Its content underpins so many avenues of academic study within the girlhood sphere, and each of these areas I've talked about today is an area of study in its own right. I've listed here a small number of potential research areas, but these are only the beginning, and the exciting thing about this resource is that everyone will approach it differently, and as academia develops, it will benefit new areas of research. As Paola said, I've worked at DC Thompson for 11 years, and in that time, I've lost count of the number of times student researchers have contacted me asking for access to the Jackie collection because they are studying various aspects of girlhood, popular culture, fashion, social attitudes, and a multitude of other subject areas. Normally, we redirect them to collections held by the British Library or the National Library of Scotland. As we're a business archive, our core user is the business, and there's only so much assistance that we can give to external researchers without detracting from our day job of the business. However, both the British Library and the National Library of Scotland have significant gaps in their collections, particularly in the 1960s and early 1970s for Jackie. Further still, the magazine is not indexed in any way, so searching out avenues of research to date has been time-consuming, laborious, and sometimes down to pure serendipity, as it's had to be an analog process. DC Thompson's Jackie collection is practically complete, although there are some small gaps. Working with the Social History Archive has seen us being able to digitize our issues and then fill the gaps with copies loaned from the British Library's collections. So finally, there is a complete archive of the Jackie back catalogue available to researchers, all in one place. The digitized images are fully text searchable, and all the images from my talk today have been drawn from my own searches of the online archive. This resource opens up a wealth of opportunities for new discoveries and research topics for you as researchers, and I hope that you have as much fun with it as I have in preparing this presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you so much, David, for such a fascinating, knowledgeable, such well-researched paper. Really fascinating overview of Jackie, its topics, its key features, the way it fits into DCT's other publications, but also fascinating the topicality of so many of the things you've said, from screens, diversity, LGBTQ plus studies, even parasocial relationships, and also, of course, thanks for highlighting the many ways that opens research avenues. We are going to now move ahead into the Q&A. So please, everyone, feel free to pop any questions you may have on the chat. But in the meantime, while everyone gathers their thoughts and starts popping their questions, I will go ahead and go and fetch some of the pre-submitted questions from our different attendees. Although I will say that some of them have already been addressed by you brilliantly, David. One of those was, how did representation of diversity, and especially ethnic diversity, appear or change in the magazine? And you did touch upon it on your talk already, but I don't know if you wanted to expand on it or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I can expand on it a little. Yeah, definitely can do. I found this a really interesting area, and I didn't go into it. And I think it's a whole area of research in itself, because I can't give it any definitive answers. People of non-white ethnicity do appear in the stories, and as early as 1964, we found stories. I think it's a comic strip story where there's an interracial relationship. But it's few and far between, and it's not certainly as diverse as a modern teenage magazine would be, and as representative. I can't say for definite that it was an editorial decision to go this way. Certainly looking at front covers of the magazine, I found it very difficult to find people of color. As I mentioned, and as I think the only one that I had on the slide that I had up was Sunita in 1989. Definitely is an area to research. I don't think there was no written policy on diversity at this point. So yeah, definitely it's a paper waiting to be written.
Excellent. Oh, great. Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. I'm going to go ahead and pick some that are already being put in the chat, but I'll go ahead to the pre-submitted questions as well. Lena said that was her question. Excellent. Although there had been a couple of people reaching out about diversity, so hopefully we've covered that. Simon's asking, why do you think there wasn't a male equivalent, or was there? You are very knowledgeable of the DC titles, so maybe...
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, DC Thompson was concurrently publishing lots of titles aimed at males, but none of them had that kind of Jackie push. It certainly wasn't about emotion and relationships. It was about football and sports and adventure and escapism. I really couldn't tell you why there wasn't one like that. Probably it wouldn't have sold. I mean, social attitudes have changed. I think the modern teenager is very much more, the modern male teenager is very much more in touch with their emotions, and it's much easier to talk about these things than maybe the social conventions of the 70s and 80s. But honestly, I couldn't tell you why we didn't have one like that. But our football
Amazing.
titles and adventure titles sold really, really well during this period.
Amazing. Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Thanks, David. We are getting a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go ahead and read some of them. Anne Louise explains that when she was looking at the 70s editions, she found them, quote unquote, overly obsessed with some specific groups of Bay City Rollers, Osmonds. Yet, when real life girls were interviewed, they were mentioning that they liked other groups. So I think she was asking about, was this an assumption, and that these groups wouldn't be liked by much younger girls, and something along the lines of like, why weren't all bands given the same or equal coverage, which may be quite like something beyond your expertise, David, but I think it's kind of talking about those pop culture, or at least those trends that you've identified preparing this paper. Yeah.
Jackie was prepared pretty much about 12 weeks before it went to publication. So they were working usually about 3 months ahead. So it can be topical. It's not, there's always a little bit of a delay because you've got to go through, printing 1 million copies of anything doesn't take, it isn't a quick process. So, the lead times were quite long on these. I know that certainly talking to previous pop editors, getting access to certain people and bands was really difficult. I wouldn't say that they were necessarily blacklisted, but they were going to go with the easiest wins in order to get them. So people like the Bay City Rollers, etc., were very easy to get hold of, whereas people like Michael Jackson was going to be much harder.
Understandable.
Part of it, it's what they could get hold of, and also looking at common denominators, going for what was probably going to be the most popular and sold. The most popular. So if you went down niche markets of Led Zeppelin and stuff like that, they might not be quite so popular as looking at people like Slade, Wizard, or whoever else knocking around in the 1970s and early 80s, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that we may forget about the immediacy and the cycles of taking 3 months between going to publication. And it's something that obviously speaks to the cycles of how long things take until they get into the page. A question from Julia Round. She thanks you, David, says that it was great to learn about the archive and hear more about the tone and the content and how it relates to the context. And she wonders if you were able to say more about the way the different parts of the magazine related to each other. So do you think there was a difference between the way the editorials, the problem pages, the stories, etc., spoke to readers and the messages they put across? Or do you think they fit together relatively coherently? And I think it speaks to what you were mentioning in your talk about well-being and really people trying to reach. I don't know if there's something there for you to expand on.
I think it does sit together coherently. There are contradictions. So, you will find a well-being problem page or something like that where they say, be happy in yourself and, you're beautiful and, being natural is great. And then the next page will be an advert for cosmetics, for example. So you will find these contradictions. But the editorial team was very tight. It was only about 5 or 6 people. So they were all talking to each other all the time and working closely. So they knew exactly what was going on. They knew their readers. They knew what was happening. It wasn't a constantly a changing group of people. So it's an area of research for people to go through and look at this using the resource to look at it and more holistically than probably I can. My gut feeling is that it was reasonably coherent with the occasional contradiction, which would have slipped in for various reasons. So, for example, the Jackie editorial team would have had no say over the advertising that went into the magazine. That would have been left to a different department. So you could inadvertently find yourself with those kind of contradictions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's very aligned with what happens nowadays as well, right? Like, it's not that there's been that massive of a change in that sense. I think a follow-up question from that we're getting in the chat, which is very engaged, is were there any companies or manufacturers, influencing their editors with their product or ideas? I think you just answered that by saying they had no say or they had not that oversight over the advertisement. So probably not one that we Probably not. Is my gut feeling. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I couldn't answer that question honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the editorial teams were out and about and would talk to people. So there's a good chance that did get some nobbling. And again, it's where they could get access to things. So there were partnerships with clothes shops and things like that. So Dorothy Perkins would provide the clothes for a fashion shoot, for example, and then they would get some product placement in the magazine. And on one of my slides, it was one of the entrance slides, but they would list where the stockists where you could buy the clothes that had featured in the magazine. So I suspect that there was some sort of back scratching going on, but I wouldn't say that it was overt.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's really, really, really insightful and interesting. A few more questions. One from Glenda Cooper. Did Jackie feature the names of its editors and writers slash have an editor's letter? Because you were mentioning about Cathy and Clare, the change then to Dear Ellie. So could you expand on that as well?
Yeah. The quick answer is no. So DC Thompson generally didn't allow bylines, and editors would quite often just be signed off as the editor or Ed. The first couple of Jackie editors were actually male, and it was a little bit later before they got a female, though a lot of the feature writers were female, but you very rarely saw their names, with some exceptions like the pop editor, whose name was given in that first issue. Some of the editorial teams who were doing out and about and photo features would appear, and you'd get to know some of them. For anyone who's Scottish and on the call, you might know Jackie Bird, the TV presenter. She was an out and about girl with Jackie magazine, and she would go out and trial different occupations each week. And so you got to know her as a kind of a character within the magazine. You'd have seen Cathy and Clare in the first slide that I gave where they were mentioned, and they showed two pictures of two women who were not editorial staff. I have no idea who these women were, but Cathy and Clare were just avatars. They were just a name, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why they did away with them after 25 years, because they probably felt it's time for a fresh name. So no, the magazine, the columns and the tone of the columns were the star, not the writers, and they kept the editorial teams very, very quiet and in the background.
Excellent. That's fascinating. And I think that answers some of the questions that were also following up from what as you were speaking, some were more popping up about the editorial team overall. I think I'm not missing any of the audience questions at this time. So I do want to bring up something that was pre-submitted while we have time. The role of fiction in Jackie magazine. So there was a bit of a question about picture stories, short stories appear. How are they influencing girls? I think maybe this is, again, a lot of these questions are go ahead and research and explore this archive. But if you could talk to us a little bit more about fiction and those picture stories and the role in Jackie, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, no problem. So fiction featured in pretty much all DC Thompson publications, including the newspapers. And we had a fiction department that dealt with the stories. And so the submissions would come in and they would look at them, edit them, say whether they were good enough. And then they would go out to the various different title editors to say, we feel this is one that's suitable for Jackie. This is one that's suitable for Bunty. This is one that's suitable for something else. So it meant that the kind of the tone and nature of our stories and the editorial style across all of our magazines was reasonably similar, and you wouldn't come across overt sexualization or anything. A lot of the tone of the stories was something that essentially anyone could pick up and read and not be offended by. Which is why the story that I mentioned, the comic story about an interracial relationship, actually caused quite a bit of a stir. And I think there was an editorial comeback on that in the magazine a few days later, or a few weeks later, defending that story. But it wasn't the central pillar of Jackie like it was in some of the magazines. It was almost like another distraction to make the magazine last longer. So you'd have a couple of days in which to read a couple of stories. But also they took different approaches. So obviously there was the prose stories, which I didn't show an example of, but they were there. They were usually short stories that lasted 2.5 pages. comic stories would usually be standalone, that would be about 3 pages. I don't think Jackie had serial stories which would go over multiple weeks. It was very much a standalone, week by week kind of title. But please, somebody, feel free to contradict me on that one. And then as technology advanced, you got the photo stories, which brought it into a new way. So there was different ways of telling stories that would appeal to different readers. So some people are going to love the photo stories, but some people will love, but would never dream of sitting down and reading a 1,200 word story in print.
Exactly. Yeah,
there's some way to
excellent.
help to answer that question.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think you make a very good point, like of that diversity and how it changes as technology advances as well, with then having those photo stories and going from comic to photograph. Like it's a fascinating resource to be able to trace that evolution and comparison as well. So
I think it's also fair to say that DC Thompson was quite influential on this, and it was really, we didn't necessarily invent these things, but we really popularized them, and then they were kind of pilfered by our competition.
Okay, excellent. And on one of the attendees, and Luis, is letting us know that it did have serials, but not over more than about 3 weeks. So
Yeah.
she was has been an eager reader and researcher by the sounds of it. So
Thanks,
the 70s
Louise.
copy is had. So thank you for that. And just one, unless there are any more questions in the chat, I'll start bringing us to a close with another pre-submitted question, which was, specifically, there were a few people that got in touch about how to research very specific themes, right? So someone was, we've addressed diversity, but there were questions as well about menstruation and how this was described. And just to bring back to your paper today, David, and how you've shown those keyword searches, and that is something that can definitely be taken over by anyone that is accessing the magazine, and how they can implement that in their own research. So just wanted to make sure we covered that. And interesting, those differences in trends that you found, right? Those heavy hitters and how many results came back. Did any of those surprise you particularly, or?
Yes and no. I mean, I wasn't surprised. Makeup was so far out ahead. But again, I was just coming up with random terms as I was playing with the resource to see what came up, and I thought these were interesting. I found the fact that the word sex appeared fewer times than kissing, for example, not surprising for a DC Thompson top publication, I have to be honest. I've seen it written about Jackie that it was about adolescence, but it was, and wanting to be a grown-up, but it was kind of pre-sex. So they didn't go into it. But I have seen problem page letters where people are saying that they feel like they're being pressurized into sex with their boyfriends, etc. And how do they deal with that? So no, what I found was this, like, pretty much anything I put into that search box came back. But like any online resource, when you're searching, one search isn't going to find you everything. So for looking for something like menstruation, it's highly unlikely they use the word menstruation very often in the magazine. It was more likely that we'd be using words like period or monthly or something like that. So it's just like any resource. You have to use lots and lots of different terms. Similarly, spots came up in that search really heavily, but that could be spots as in acne, or it could just be the word spots because the dress had spots.
Yeah, excellent. Really, really key advice there for when we're researching newspapers and magazine, that use of different keywords, trying to really also think of the way that may have been spoken about in the 60s, or the different nomenclature that may have been given. So that's really, really good advice for anyone.
Some of that nomenclature can be quite uncomfortable to type into a computer. Certainly, when I was doing some searches, I was thinking, I can't believe I'm using this term, but I'm having to, just to see what comes back.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, excellent. And I think one of the last questions is, how can we get a hold of the slides? And just to reiterate, these the video and the recording of this paper will be sent out to all of those that are in the meeting and sign up. And I don't think there are any more questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and put the links one more time in the chat, and really, really take the time to thank you, David. This was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for such an insightful, in-depth researched paper about Jackie, where you've really, really shown us not just a fantastic overview of everything that it has already inspired, from its nostalgia, its reception, its legacy, but also how much there's left to do with it, which is the exciting bit, right? And how much this digitization will probably give it a second life, which is the goal. So thank you so much, David, once again. And I'm sure everyone is actually joining in the chat, welcoming, saying thank you, and really, really, really thank you for the paper today.
That's right. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.